Hello everyone, Pocket here, and welcome into a detailed guide for the Dragonflight Season 4 Mythic Plus Dungeons. This is the Dungeon Breakdown. Hey, what is up guys? This is your all-inclusive guide into Ruby life pools. And we're not just going to be covering boss mechanics, but we're going to be covering everything to different pulls, trash mechanics, tips, tricks, everything that can get you started and improve your gameplay inside of this dungeon. So feel free to skip around if you are interested in specific pulls or specific bosses just to get a little more insight. Otherwise, we're gonna do the entire dungeon and talk about everything along the way. So in these first pulls here, you're going to have a Primal Juggernaut, Flash Frost Chillweavers, and Flash Frost Earthshapers. The Juggernaut is the giant rock thing, obviously, and he's gonna be casting Excavating Blast. This needs to be avoided at all costs. You do not want to get caught in this, especially at high keys. This will one-shot you, most likely. So watch for that big circle on the ground and make sure you do not stand in that. Otherwise, you're going to have your Chill Weavers casting Ice Bolt and Ice Shield. And for kick priority, you're going to want to prioritize Ice Shield over the Ice Bolts. But if you have an extra kick, might as well get the Ice Bolt as well. The Ice Shield is just going to put a large shield on somebody, so that's why you want to kick it, just so you can kill the ads a little bit faster. And your Earth Shapers are going to be casting Tectonic Slam. This cannot be interrupted. However, it can be knocked up or knocked back, but not a big deal. It's just going to do a little bit of AoE damage for your healers. And keep in mind too that this may not be the most ideal route that we're about to do. I'm just in a pug, so this tank is going to do kind of whatever it is that he wants to do. So I know there's a few pulls in this dungeon that I wouldn't have normally done otherwise. So the rogue did leave me behind. I'm having to pot here, and we're just going to skip by this. Remember that if you do walk over those eggs, it will spawn infused whelps, so make sure that you do not walk over those eggs for any reason, because there's no point. Now we're moving on to the mini-boss, Defiler Dragar. He has a frontal charge called Blazing Rush. It's going to target a random friendly player. Just make sure that if you are the target, that you move out of it and don't get hit. It'll do a lot of damage to you. Best practice is to have your back against a wall. That way he charges directly into the wall, doesn't move very far, and we can keep melee DPS on him at all times. He's also going to cast an ability called Steel Barrage, which is those little swirlies that you see on the ground. Just make sure you avoid those. They are going to spawn underneath your feet. They are pretty easy to dodge, so make sure you're not taking that unnecessary damage. One of those shouldn't kill you, but it also depends on the key level that you are doing. We ended up pulling an extra pack here. I don't know if this was desired or if this was accidental, but we have this pack. We're just going to clear this up before we move on to the first boss. And the first boss of this dungeon is going to be Melidrussa Chillworn. The first ability that she is going to cast is going to be Hail Bombs. They are going to spawn small blue swirlies underneath your feet. Make sure to avoid this, and best practice, if you keep these close together as a group, whether you stack as a group or at least stand close to each other, you can maximize the amount of space that you're going to have in this room rather than if everyone is just super spread. Now, if you make contact with these icicles that are now on the ground, they will detonate, causing a lot of ice damage. The next ability that she's going to use is Chill Storm. Chill Storm summons a growing storm of frost at a player's location that pulls players towards the center. Every second, the storm inflicts frost damage to all players and an additional frost damage to players standing within it. After 6 seconds, the storm explodes, inflicting more frost damage to all players and pushing them away. So the player that is actually targeted by this does not receive any additional damage unless they stay inside of the circle when it spawns. So make sure if you have this, run it out and then get out as quickly as possible. If you stay in that circle, you're going to take additional damage on top of the damage that you're already taking. And then make sure you are well clear of those hail bombs that are stuck inside of the ground. That way when the knockback happens, you do not get caught in those hail bombs, again taking more additional damage. The last mechanics that she has is she will spawn a dozen infused whelps at both 75% and 45% health. These whelps attack with cold claws, which apply primal chill to its target. Upon 8 stacks of primal chill, it will freeze somebody solid, and during this time too, each stack reduces your movement speed. So this can be dispelled, so if you are healing, make sure that you are dispelling this at every opportunity that you can, so they are not taking more than 8 stacks. Now the whelp should die fairly quickly, so you shouldn't have this issue really of getting more than 8 stacks. During this time as well, she will put a shield on herself and cast Frost Overload. Frost Overload causes large amounts of frost damage every 2 seconds, and she will only stop when you break her shield. So you want to make sure you pull all those whelps on top of the boss, cleave down the whelps, and burn that shield as quickly as possible. Once the shield has been burned down, you will then have to use an interrupt to stop her from channeling. The longer it takes you to burst that shield, the more amount of frost tick damage that you are going to take, and it's going to cause your healer some issues, especially in these high keys. During the frost overload is an excellent time to use group-wide defensive mechanics like shields or darkness or Zephyr or anything that will help your healer out a little bit. And if you don't have any of those, make sure you're popping your personal defenses as well. From a healing perspective, the hardest part about this boss is if the DPS is low and they do not burst that shield fast, because you're going to end up taking multiple ticks of that frost damage. However, if you have a lot of DPS, they will burst that shield very quickly, and you really don't have to worry about that phase all that much. You really don't even have to use that many cooldowns if they can burst it quick enough. So keep that in mind. If your group is taking a lot of those ticks, you know, it might be the DPS not burning that shield down quick enough. Alright, now while we ride these dragons up to the next part of the dungeon, if you enjoy this content, remember to like and subscribe to support the channel. And leave a comment letting me know what class and spec you play. For some reason, I get a lot of tanks coming in contact with me after watching some of my videos, which I find is curious, as I thought I would have like more healers. But yeah, let me know what you guys are playing. Alright, so now that we're up at this upper ring, we're going to do a full circle around the entire ring, killing all of the trash around the life pools to then allow us to attack the next boss. So normally I would go left, and once we go left, we pull the first mini boss, which is Thunderhead, but we're not going to go left this time, we're going right. And in these trash packs up here, we're going to have Cinder Weavers, Flame Dancers, and Blazebound Destroyers. Cinder Weavers are just going to cast Cinder Bolt, which is a single target fireball-like attack that does a bunch of damage. If you can interrupt it, do so, but they're going to keep casting it over and over and over again. They will also cast an ability called Burning Ambition, a reckless infusion of fire magic that increases haste by 50%, but also increases all damage taken by 25%. I believe this can be purged, or if you're a mage, you can spell steal this. However, correct me if I'm wrong. The Flame Dancers are going to cast an ability called Flame Dance, which does a whole bunch of fire damage every second for 6 seconds. The Flame Dancers are going to cast an ability called Flame Dance, which causes a whole bunch of fire damage every second for 6 seconds. This cannot be kicked with a normal interrupt. You're going to have to use a knockback or a stun or something like that to prevent this from casting. But if you can prevent it, do so. It does do a bunch of damage, especially when there's more than one casting it at the same time. The Blazebound Destroyers are going to use an ability called Living Bomb, which is going to target somebody, put a circle around their feet, and upon expiration, it is going to do damage to anyone inside of that, also knocking them up and stunning them. You can use this on other enemies. So if you have Living Bomb on you, make sure that you are standing underneath all the enemies so you do additional damage and you are interrupting everything that is casted during that time it goes off. Alright, so this tank ended up pulling Flamegullet, which is the other mini boss. This boss is 100% skippable. I recommend skipping it. It's very difficult to do, especially on a fortified week. This one is tyrannical, however I still recommend never doing this boss. The first ability that he uses is Flame Breath. It's just a frontal cone, make sure you're not standing in that. Next, he has an ability called Fire Maw, which is just a tank buster ability. So this will only hit your tank. It does a whole bunch of damage. So tanks, make sure you have defenses up, or healers, make sure that you're ready to get those heals off on them if they need it. I mean, let's be honest, tank survivability these days are incredible. So I'm sure you don't need to use any additional things as like a healer for this. So if you do end up pulling this mini boss, he does do an additional ability upon reaching 50% health. And this ability is called Molten Blood. Molten Blood will do group-wide ticking damage every 2 seconds, and it increases in damage every single cast. So he gets harder and harder the longer that he is alive. I recommend if you do end up pulling him, save all your cooldowns till after 50%, and make sure that you burn him down from 50% to 0 as quickly as possible, or he will cause some issues for you and your group. So the longer he's alive, the harder it gets. So here I just wanted to emphasize I have Living Bomb on me. I'm going to cover the circle around all of the adds. That way when I get hit up and take damage, all the adds take damage and it interrupts all their casts and channels. So make sure that you are doing that. And if you hit your team with this, it doesn't do that much damage. If you are low on health, just make sure that you are moving out of the circle so you're not taking that additional damage. But every single time, make sure that you are interrupting these casts using Living Bomb. They also cast Inferno, which is unavoidable AoE damage to everyone within a 100-yard radius. And finally, once these Blaze-bound destroyers die, they will cast an ability called Burnout, which is that large orange circle. Do not stand in that, as that will one-shot you. So we do end up pulling the other mini boss, Thunderhead, which you normally shouldn't have to do because you don't need the percent if you do one mini boss over the other one. So now we're going to be over on percent. However, this is perfect for me describing the mechanics to you guys. So Thunderhead has a similar frontal cone called Storm Breath. Do not stand in this. It does a ton of damage. It is completely avoidable. And again, similarly to the other one, Thunderhead has an ability called Thunderjaw, which is another tank buster ability, which does a whole bunch of damage to your tank and knocks them back. So make sure if you are the tank, your back is firmly against a wall or a barrier, or in this case, flower. And finally, he uses an ability called Rolling Thunder. This will apply 2 dots randomly to players in your party. And upon expiring, it does a massive amount of damage. If you are taking a priest in your group, make sure this is not mass dispelled, as you do not want both of these to go off at the same time. So this should be dealt by your healer dispelling one, topping off the group, and letting the other one expire. Similarly, if you do not dispel any of them, they will both expire at the same time, doing all that damage and probably wiping your group. So make sure your healer is dispelling the first one as quickly as possible. That way he has plenty of time to top off the group and no one dies. And personally, I think, once again, Thunderhead is easier than Flamegullet, so I recommend doing him and not the Fire Dragon. Again, in this case, we decided to do both. And finally, once all this trash is dealt with, we are now on to Blazehoof, the second boss in this dungeon. Blazehoof is all about positioning. Poor positioning will cause your entire group to wipe. It is important to know where to stand and why it is that you should stand in that particular spot. So the first ability that she uses is Ritual of Blaze Binding. This is that large fiery circle that spawns underneath a player's feet. So you can choose where this is spawned by everyone stacking together. So once this cast goes off, it will spawn a blaze-bound firestorm. This is an ad that needs to be swapped to immediately and burned down as quickly as possible. It starts out by casting an ability called Roaring Blaze. This is a kick that needs to be interrupted at all costs. Do not let this go off, as it will most likely wipe your group. So if you're in a group that has a lot of long cooldowns on those kicks, make sure that you are planning out your kicks accordingly so this doesn't go off. And then once the ad dies, it will cast Burnout, denying you places to walk on the ground, so you do have to keep walking around the circle. The ad will also cast Inferno, which once again is a large group-wide AoE unavoidable damage and the faster you kill it, the less of these will go off. And finally, the last ability that she uses is Molten Boulder. Once again, she will target a random player in the group and cast a large boulder, which will roll across the room about 100 yards and then expire, exploding, causing more fire on the ground. So remember that this boss has plenty of room. You have this entire circle to kite this boss around if you need to. So ideally, you want to bait the molten boulders back where you came from so you're not causing more fire damage to spawn on the ground. And then when she casts Ritual Blaze Binding, this ad should be in an area that is easily accessible. You don't want your boulder to spawn over the top of the ad, as you just cause problems for your melee DPS. So your group should stack together for Ritual Blaze Binding in an area that is very accessible to all players. And then when she casts Molten Boulder, again, make sure that you are baiting it in a direction that doesn't cause you guys future issues. After that, it's just a rinse and repeat. So if you notice, we always spawn the boulders pointed into the sides of the room, and then when the ad dies, the tank pulls the boss far enough away for the group to stack in between, behind the boss and the fire, spawning the ad in that spot, and then we diverge to the left or to the right, which once again will spawn the boulder away from the ad and giving us more space to move around the circle. But that right there was an example of poor positioning for that boulder. But it's not the end of the world. But with that, Blazehoof goes down. So because we have a rogue in this group, we do end up skipping this first trash, which honestly is pretty great, especially on a fortified week, as those guys' lightning storm is super annoying, especially as a healer. So it's not super terrible, it's a nice skip to have. But that's because we did both mini bosses. So in these trash packs, you're going to have Storm Warriors, Primal Thunderclouds, Tempest Channelers, and Flame Channelers. So starting with the Storm Warriors, the only thing that you need to worry about is Thunderclap. So if you can, avoid standing in melee, as this will reduce your haste and your movement speed. Next we have the Primal Thunderclouds. They have a large shield on them, and when it expires or is dispelled, they will cast Crackling Detonation, which they will jump towards a person, causing that swirly to appear on the ground. Don't stand in that, it does a lot of damage. Next we have the Flame Channelers, and what you need to look out here for is the Flash Fires. Flash Fire needs to be kicked at all costs. It does a ton of damage, and on top of that, it also heals the caster. And finally, we have the Tempest Channeler, and they cast Lightning Storm. Now this can't be kicked, and it does a ton of lightning damage every second for 5 seconds. This is an excellent time to use a personal defensive, and healers if you need to pop a minor healing cooldown, or a big one if you have to. They will also cast Thunderbolt, which you should use with any spare kicks that you have not used already for Flash Fire. So on a fortified week, these ads can do a ton of damage, especially if it's bolstering or enraging. The amount of damage that's going to come out from all these ads is going to be a lot, so do your best to kill these as quickly as possible, get those kicks, and avoid all those unnecessary mechanics. And now finally, we've made it to the final boss, Kyraka and Stormvein. This is a 2-phase fight, with phase 2 starting when Stormvein reaches 50% health. So starting out, the two bosses are separated, and the group should stay relatively close to each other near Stormvein on the ground. During phase 1, you should do as much damage as you possibly can to Kyraka. So range can usually hit her when she's flying around, and especially when she comes onto the ground to use the fire breath. But when she is using the fire breath on the ground, this is a perfect opportunity for melee to swap over and do some damage to Kyraka. At any point in time during this fight, if you stand in the fire on the ground, or if you are hit by the fire breath, you're going to receive a stack of Inferno Core, on top of which Kyraka will periodically target one player from your party and cast Flame Spit, which will also apply Inferno Core. Inferno Core does a bunch of fire damage over time, and upon expiration, it leaves those flame puddles on the ground. Once again, if you touch those flame puddles, you will then reapply Inferno Core back onto you. During the fight, Stormvein will cast Cloudburst, which is a channel ability, and when it goes off, if you are casting, it will lock you from that spell, School of Magic, and it also does group-wide party damage. So make sure you are not casting when this goes off. He will also cast Winds of Change, which is a pushback effect that happens from different directions during the fight. It also pushes the fire puddles on the ground in that direction too, so keep in mind as they will move during that pushback. So those are pretty much the main mechanics for this fight. Once again, at 50%, Stormvein will jump on Kyraka's back. Once they are together, Kyraka should be the primary target, as you want to kill the dragon first and as quickly as possible before going on to Stormvein. Pretty much, if you can get Kyraka down, it's pretty much a kill. You shouldn't wipe after Kyraka goes down. That's the bigger threat, so make sure the dragon goes down first and is always your primary target whenever you can. So here you can see it gets a little crazy. There is a lot of fire on the ground with people standing in it, touching it when they shouldn't be, so we do end up getting a lot of fire. However, we do get Kyraka down, and at this point, once again, it's pretty much GG's. So if you do get that Inferno Core DPS, make sure you use defensives. The final ability that I actually forgot about is called Storm Slam, which is from Stormvein, and it will be cast on the tank. It does a whole bunch of damage, and it needs to be dispelled by the healer as quickly as possible, as Storm Slam will additionally increase nature damage taken by 100% for 30 seconds, and it stacks, so once again, make sure that this is dispelled. And there you have it. That is the end to this guide. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you think I missed out on something, let me know in the comments below. Once again, thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.